Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to continue on chapter 5 of our study and lecture of Battle for the Mind by William Sargent. We studied the first chapter was about experiments on animals. The second chapter was about animal and human behavior compared. That is when we learned about how Pavlov's conditioning experiments on dogs were related to humans. Then we also learned about traumas in the First and Second World War. Then now our third chapter was on the use of drugs in psychotherapy. Our fourth chapter was about psychoanalysis, shock treatments, and lobotomy. And today's chapter is going to be about techniques of religious conversion. So I am going to make this as entertaining as possible. So I am a salesman, not a showman, but I'm going to give it a shot. So we'll see how that goes. I don't want my tits showing, so I'm going to put this, there we go. And I'm going to have the sheets right here, the images. And then, yeah, so that's it. So now we're moving on to chapter 5. So since I have a heavy Mexican accent, I will do my best to make it as entertaining as possible and as clear and crisp as I can get my English. So I will not be speaking really fast. And here we go. Chapter 5, Techniques of Religious Conversion. La 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 la. No, I'm just kidding. So in approaching this subject, we shall try to find out what it is that is common to many religions in the methods of studying conversion employed by their priests and evangelists. We shall endeavor to bring this into relation with what we know of the psychology of the brain. We must beware of being distracted by what it is that is being preached. The truths of Christianity have nothing to do with the beliefs inspired by the rites of pagan religions or of devil worshippers, but the psychological mechanisms of which use has been made by religions on each side of this gulf will bear the closest examination. Ooh, this is already exciting. The leaders of successful faiths have never, it may in fact be said, dispersed entirely with psychological weapons in their attempts to confer spiritual grace. Okay, what the fuck is confer or confer? Like confess, bestow on, consult, grant. Let me see. How do you pronounce it? Because I have no idea. Confer. It sounds to me like confess. So confer. A little louder, bitch. Confer. And it means bestow, a little degree, benefit, or right. Like to bestow on you. Okay. So I was wondering what the fuck is going to be the benefit of having a discussion about this when nowadays anyone can literally just have their iPhone read it to them. So the benefit that you're gonna have from studying this with me is that anything that I don't understand, it is likely that there is gonna be some people there that also do not understand it either. So that way we can clear up what it is that the book is trying to convey. And it is not just a robotic voice with no soul trying to explain it to you. So the last sentence said, the leaders of successful faiths have never, it may be in fact be said, dispersed entirely with physiological weapons in their attempts to confer spiritual grace on their fellow men. So that last sentence was kind of confusing. So what we're gonna do is that I'm gonna copy it and then I'm gonna put it on Gemini, which is the AI app from Google. And then I'm gonna see what it means, because honestly, that last sentence didn't make a lot of sense to me. So it was copying. Let's see. I'm opening Gemini. Thanks, Gemini. So I'm closing the quote. Let's see. So now we're facing the sentence that said, the leaders of successful faiths have never, it may in fact be said, and this is what it says. Even in successful religions, leaders have often used methods that affect people's bodies, such as rituals or practices, to help them achieve spiritual alignment. Really? That does actually make sense. Wow. So Gemini is amazing to rephrase sentences. So I'm going to rephrase you the sentence. And then I'm going to tell you what is the rephrasing of Gemini. It's so amazing. It says the following. Rephrase, make the following sentence easier to understand. Open quote. The leaders of successful faiths have never, it may in fact be said, dispersed entirely with physiological weapons on their attempts to confer spiritual grace on their fellow men. And this is the rephrased version. Even in successful religions, leaders have often used methods that affect people's bodies, such as rituals or practices, to help them achieve spiritual enlightenment. And that's true. It's like in gang stalking, your body has to be tired to keep you in a weaker and more open state of mind. Additionally, in gang stalking, it only got really bad in my experience whenever I was tired, whenever my body was not at 100%. So now we're moving on to the book and we're continuing from where we left off. It says the following. Fastening, chastening of the flesh by scourging and physical discomfort, regulation of breathing, disclosure of awesome mysteries, drumming, dancing, singing, inducement of panic, fear, weird or glorious lighting, incense, intoxicant drugs. These are only some of the many methods used to modify normal brain functions for religious purposes. Some sects, S-E-C-T-S, sects, pay more attention than others to a direct stirring up of emotions as a means of affecting the higher nervous system, but few wholly neglect it. So, in other words, normal brain function for religious purposes is modified using various methods, such as drugs, incense, glorious lighting, fear, and also this part is saying that some religions put emphasis on the modification of brain function for its purposes. Some religions actually pay more attention than others in affecting the higher nervous system, and only a few of them neglect it. Next paragraph. The evidence already presented suggests that the physiological mechanisms which make possible the implantation or removal of behavior patterns in men and animals are analogous, and that when the brain breaks down under severe stress, the resultant behavior changes. I began reading this book because of gang stalking. I thought to myself, how is it possible that a group of people can convince me of such a thing? And I began reading this book and it made absolute sense. Gang stalking is literally brainwashing. That's exactly why when my gang stalking started, I was getting so many people actively influencing me to use drugs. It was crazy. I literally had to disband from every person that I knew because I did not know who or where. I mean, even at work. You know, I was wondering if any of them were actually Scientologists because I went on a binge of Leah Remini's the Aftermath of Scientology show, and that's exactly what was happening to her in Scientology. She was getting gang stalked. Anyways, so we're gonna continue. When the brain breaks down under severe stress, the resultant behavior changes, whether in man or in animal, depend both on the individual's inherited temperament and on the conditioned behavior patterns which he has built up by a gradual adaptation to environment. It has also been pointed out that those who wish to disperse wrong beliefs and undesirable behavior patterns and afterwards implant saner beliefs and attitudes are more likely to achieve success if they can first induce some degree of nervous tension or stir up sufficient feelings of anger or anxiety to secure the person's undivided attention and possibly increase his suggestibility. by increasing or prolonging stresses in various ways or inducing physical debilitation, a more thorough alteration of the person's thinking processes may be achieved. The immediate effect of such treatment is usually to impair judgment and increase suggestibility. And though when the tension is removed, the suggestibility likewise diminishes. Yet ideas implanted while it lasted may remain. If the stress or the physical debilitation or both are carried one stage further, it may happen that patterns of thought and behavior, especially those of recent acquisition, become disrupted. New patterns can then be substituted or suppressed. Wait. New patterns can then be substituted or suppressed patterns allowed to reassert themselves. Or the subject may begin to think and act in ways that precisely contradict his former ones. Some temperamental types seem relatively impervious to all emotional stresses imposed on them. Others retain their beliefs, once firmly implanted, with a tenacity that defines the severest psychological and physiological shock treatments and even brain operations specially designed to disrupt them. But such resistance is unusual. With these facts in mind, one can hope to understand more clearly the physiological mechanisms at work in some types of sudden religious conversion. Hence, the repetitive summary. Methods of religious conversion have hitherto been considered more from psychological and metaphysical angles than from physiological and mechanistic ones. This is so fascinating. But techniques employed often approximate so closely to modern political techniques of brainwashing and thought control that throws light on the mechanics of the other. It is convenient to start with the better documented history of sudden religious conversion, which has this in common with political conversion, that an individual or group of individuals may adopt new beliefs or patterns of behavior as a result of illuminations bursting upon the mind suddenly and with great intensity, often after periods of intense emotional stress. Sorry, my mom walked by and I got a little distracted. So it is convenient to start with a better documented history of sudden conversion, okay, which has this in common with political conversion, that an individual or group of individuals may adapt new beliefs or patterns or behavior, as a result of illuminations bursting upon the mind, suddenly with great intensity. Often after periods of intense emotional stress. But since political prisons publish, okay, so I already went over this. So it is basically saying that religious rituals are very close to modern political techniques of brainwashing and thought control, and that they shine light on each other, as in they reveal the mechanics of each other. So we're going to start talking about the more documented history of sudden religious conversion. Okay, so now we go. It is convenient to start with a better documented history of sudden religious conversion, which has this in common with political conversion, that an individual or group of individuals may adopt new beliefs or patterns of behavior as a result of illuminations bursting upon the mind suddenly with great intensity, often after periods of intense emotional stress. But since political prisons publish no available clinical reports on the physiological changes noted in those whom they have subjected to intolerable mental stress, it will be convenient to quote those observed in analogous combat casualties and then compare them with those observed in sudden religious converts. So what's going to happen in the following reading is that we're going to start observing physiological changes in those who has been subjected to intolerable mental stress because of war, and we're going to be comparing those to sudden religious converts. And we're gonna use two texts. Okay, I'm just gonna read it. Two conveniently parallel texts are John Wesley's Journal of 1739 and Grinker and Spiegel's report on their treatment of acute war neurosis in North Africa in 1942. Grinker and Spiegel described the effects of application of war experiences under barbiturate drugs as follows. So application is the effect when the person goes into like an opening of psychological point where like there's like I forget that we studied the meaning of application on chapter 2, but since it has been so long, we're gonna go over the meaning of application. I know it is like a psychological effect of it's either like when one becomes suggestible, like there's an outburst, or a reaction. So here we go. This is what a reaction. It's or I think it's abreaction. Abreaction. Let's not abrecation. I was reading abreaction. So it's like a catharsis. Abreaction is a psychoanalytical term for relieving an experience to purge it of its emotional excesses. A type of catharsis. For some reason, I thought that was a C. I read abrecation. So I read it wrong on the the 2 and 3rd chapters. I just thought it was abrecation. So it's actually called abreaction. Let me make sure I'm pronouncing it right.
Abreaction.
So it's abreaction.
Abreaction.
So barbiturates, we know it's a drug. Don't judge me, Wes. So you remember that with a lot of clarity. Let's see barbiturates. Let's see. Let's just recall the vocabulary. So we're gonna listen to a quick barbiturate. So it's anxiety medication. Okay. So barbiturate. So it's like a calming drug, a barbiturate. Like Xanax, I guess. Hey, Xanax. Okay, so Grinker and Spiegel describe the effects of abreaction of war experiences under barbiturate drugs as follows. The terror exhibited is electrifying to watch. The body becomes increasingly tense and rigid. The eyes widen and the pupils dilate, while the skin becomes covered with a fine perspiration. The hands move convulsively. Breathing becomes incredibly rapid or shallow. The intensity of the emotion sometimes becomes more than they can bear, and frequently at the height of the reaction, there is a collapse and the patient falls back in the bed and remains quiet for a few minutes. So this is the effect of application of war experiences under barbiturate drugs. Okay, that's what we just read. And now we're gonna read Wesley's. So Wesley reports under the date April 30th of 1739. Excuse me. We understand that many were offended at the cries of those on whom the power of God came, among whom was a physician who was much afraid there might be fraud or imposure in the case. Today, one whom he had known many years was the first who broke out into strong cries and tears. He could hardly believe his own eyes and ears. He went and stood close to her and observed every symptom, till great drops of sweat ran down her face and all her bones shook. He then knew not what to think, being clearly convinced it was not fraud, nor yet any natural disorder. But when both her soul and her body were healed in a moment, he acknowledged the finger of God. Is it a guy or a girl then? Also, it was a girl. Okay, I see. Now we're reading the Grinker and Spiegel report. So, actually, let's go back a little bit. So, comparing those two, right now, the point that the author William Sargent wants to make is that there are parallels between war experiences or war experienced patients under barbiturate drugs and those experiences of parishioners in religious conversions. This is fascinating. So now we're going to read a report on Grinker and Spiegel. It says, Grinker and Spiegel report. The stuporous become alert. The mute can talk. The deaf can hear. The paralyzed can move. And the terror-stricken psychotics become well-organized individuals. What happened? Sorry, I lost my page. Give me 1 second. Okay, fine. So now we are on the report by Grinker and Spiegel. And it says the following. Oh, I'm sorry. The Wesley report. So Wesley can also record it. I will show you him that was lying till then, and is now a lamb. Him that was a drunkard, and is now exemplary sober. The whoremonger that was, who now abhors the very garment spotted by the flesh. The main difference lies in the explanations given for the same impressive results. Wesley and his followers attributed the phenomenon to the intervention of the Holy Ghost. It is the Lord's doing, and it is wonderful in our eyes. Grinker and Spiegel, on the other hand, believed that the results demonstrated the correctness of Freud's theories, in which they had themselves believed, as will be shown later. Almost identical physiological and psychological phenomena may result from religious healing, from religious healing methods and conversion techniques, equally in the most primitive and the more highly civilized cultures. They may be adduced as convincing proofs of the truth of whatever religious or philanthropic beliefs are invoked. But since those beliefs are often logical, irreconcilable with each other, and since the similarity of the physiological and psychological phenomena produced by their invocation are all that they may have in common, we find ourselves confronted with a mechanistic principle deserving the most careful examination. Just as we have hitherto selected Pavlov's experiments on dogs to illustrate one aspect of our larger problem, and war neurosis of World War II to illustrate another, so here John Wesley's methods and results will be selected as typical of those seen in an effective and socially valuable religious setting. Nobody can doubt their religious efficacy or social value, for his preaching converted people by the thousands. And he also built up an efficient system for perpetuating these beliefs. So just as we earlier talked about Pavlov's experiments to illustrate one aspect of the problem that we aforementioned, and then we also illustrated war neurosis of World War II to illustrate the other problem. And now we're going to talk about John Wesley's methods of conversion, because there is documentation of this guy, of Wesley, John Wesley. John Wesley's preaching converted people by the thousands. So that's what we're going to be using that as an example. So Harold Nicholson wrote in 1955, finally, a revivalist of genius appeared in the person of John Wesley. This English is so weird. On the death of Wesley in 1791, heathenism returned for a short while to England. Okay, so what's heathenism? Heathen is like a whore. Define heathenism. So heathenism is based on the pre-Christian religions of the Germanic peoples of the Iron Age and Middle Ages. Practitioners use historical, archaeological, and folkloric evidence to reconstruct these past belief systems. Heathenism is inspired by the religions of Europe, linguistically Germanic societies, most commonly those that spoke Old Norse. Some heathen group considers heathenry to be an ethnic religion with links to a Germanic race and believe it should be reserved for people of Northern European descent. However, a much larger proportion of heathens believe the religion is open to all. The word heathen is a synonym for pagan and has historically been used to designate non-Christians, usually in a derogatory way. The word heathen likely comes from a term for a country inhabitant, in particular heath dweller. I thought it meant like a whore.
Reveal your salvation, since I am your favorite among these heathens.
I just thought it meant whore for some reason. Oh, so it is still derogatory. So the word heathen is also derogatory. So the word heathen is also derogatory. It has two meanings apparently. It can be used to describe someone who is not religious. So I'm technically I am a heathen, but it also is referred to someone who is actively offensive to a religion, or it can mean uncultured. So someone who is not cultured. Why do I believe that everything means whore?
I'd like to be given over to shameful lust.
And they shall be white as snow, except you're all heathens.
Okay, so now we're gonna go back to the reading. we just figured out that heathenism doesn't mean whore. So apparently heathenism returned when Wesley died in 1791. So on the death of Wesley in 1791, heathenism returned for a short while to England. The church almost reverted to the condition which Bishop Butler denounced in 1736. Bishop Butler did not foresee the great flame that John Wesley was so shortly to kindle, or that after a temporary reaction, the evangelicals would receive from Wesley's hand a torch that was to smoke and flicker for some 80 years. So in other words, John Wesley appeared, and when Wesley died in 1791, heathenism returned for a little bit to England, and the church almost reverted to the condition which Bishop Butler... What does denounce exactly mean? Denounce.
Denounce.
Publicly declared to be wrong or evil. So, okay, so that's I thought it was the same, but less severe. To declare something as wrong or evil, that's pretty harsh. So the church almost went back to the condition which was denounced in 1736. And the Bishop Butler did not foresee that John Wesley, I'm gonna use Gemini. So when you copy it, there is some mistakes. I guess the OS doesn't recognize the font too clearly. So we are rephrasing the passage. And it says the following. Finally, so we are rephrasing the italicized part to the following. Finally, a brilliant and influential religious leader emerged in the form of John Wesley. Okay? When Wesley died in 1971, in 1791, religious apathy and a decline in the faith briefly returned to England. Okay? The church nearly fell back into the state of neglect that the Bishop Butler had criticized in 1736. However, Bishop Butler couldn't have predicted the widespread impact of John Wesley's teachings. Although there was a temporary setback, the evangelical movement, inspired by Wesley's ideas, continued to grow and influence religion in England for about 80 years, even though its impact sometimes seemed uncertain or wavering. Okay. I feel like these sentences are unnecessarily complex. I think it's the era, but Gemini is an incredible rephraser. Okay, so now we're moving on. It is now generally admitted that he made great numbers of ordinary English people think less about their material well-being than their spiritual salvation, thus fortifying them at a critical period of the French Revolution. So this was when the United States was being formed. Against the dangerous materialistic teachings of Tom Paine, the powerful influence of the Methodist revival still permeates England in the form of its nonconformist conscience. Moreover, it was descendants of those who fostered this powerful religious movement in England, who later pioneered the great trade union movement of the present era. The 18th century, like the 20th, considered itself an age of reason. The intellect was in fact held to be far more important than the emotions, when habits of thought and behavior needed to be dictated. Wesley's great success was due to his finding that such habits were mostly easily implanted or eradicated by a tremendous assault on the emotions. Most Wesleyan ministers not confess themselves bewildered when they read the detailed reports of his conversions, after blinding their eyes to the tremendous power still latent in the technique he employed. All evidence goes to show that there can be no new Protestant revival while the policy continues of appealing mainly to adult intelligence and reason, and until church leaders consent to make more advantage. Until church leaders consent to take more advantage of the normal person's emotional mechanism for disrupting old behavior patterns and implanting new. Holy shit. This is the same thing that gang stalking works through. Your emotions are assaulted to an extreme, and the emotions overpower your sense of reason. That's exactly what happens in gang stalking. Exactly. If you're new to the channel, Gang stalking is when a bunch of stupid people try to fuck you up, and in that process, you get convinced of crazy realities. But the truth is that there is a bunch of people fucking with you all the time. I am covering the similarities between this and gang stalking because I lived gang stalking for 7 years. And during that time, there was so much shit talking and impersonations of me everywhere online. Like, my reputation was smeared to the fucking floor. It was insane. So I had to literally stop talking to everyone. But during those 7 years, I lived a lot of crazy experiences, which you can actually find on the playlist of the gang stalking playbook. There, I'm using an emoji face and I tell you all the shit that I experienced back then. So the reason that I began reading this book was because I needed some reasoning. And this book actually gave me a lot of insight into understanding the actual workings of gang stalking. This book literally gave me so much clarity that I was able to snap out of it and understand exactly everything that was happening to me. Gang stalking is like a religious conversion where people around you are continuously stressing you out and imposing new beliefs on you. So you start believing all this crazy shit. The truth is that I always knew that there was something going on, that something was gonna happen, as in something was being done to me, but I couldn't understand it. So I never said anything because I didn't want to appear like a crazy person. So I waited until I understood everything before I could actually talk about it. So if you happen to know who I am and if you know me in person, that's why I disappeared for 7 years, because I had a bunch of haters that were doing a bunch of crazy shit to me, and I have to leave. But I'm fine. If you want to know all the shit that I went through, all that information is in my channel. So coming back to this, so here, what we just read talks about the 18th century, which was considered an age of reason. The intellect was taken more, it was given more importance than the emotions. And when habits of thought had to be dictated, people were assaulted emotionally via religion. And that Wesleyan ministers confessed to be bewildered when they read the reports of the conversions. They didn't know the tremendous power that the techniques that Wesley had to minister were so powerful. And no new Protestant revival can happen while policy continues to be appealing to adult intelligence and reason, until the church decides and consents leaders to take advantage of the normal person's emotional mechanism. So in order to disrupt old behavior and implant new behavior. That's insane. Oh my God. This is fucking crazy. Okay, so now we'll continue on the reading. Wesley's own efforts as a preacher were relatively ineffective until his own heart became strangely warmed at a meeting in Aldersgate Street in 1738. He had previously gone for help in a state of severe mental depression to Peter Bollier, a Moravian missionary, having returned a total failure from being the pastor of the newly founded colony of Georgia. Hitherto, he had always believed that spiritual salvation could be achieved only by the performance of good works, as opposed to faith alone. His sudden conversion transformed him into one who puts faith beyond everything, enabling him to cast all his fears aside, and he found a sudden ally in his brother Charles, who had been with him in Georgia, and whom Peter Bollier had also been trying to change. Charles was likewise suffering from acute mental depression, induced both by his own Georgia experiences and by physical debilitation after the second attack of pleurisy. Okay, so I do not know what pleurisy is, so we're gonna go check that out. Pleurisy, like pleasure, but issy, like pussy. Let's see, pleurisy. So pleurisy is inflammation of the tissues that line the lungs and the chest cavity. Pleurisy is a condition in which the pleura, two large thin layers of tissue that separate your lungs from your chest wall, pleurisy, I've never even heard about it, becomes inflamed. So also called pleuritis. Pleurisy causes sharp chest pain, pleuritic pain that worsens during breathing. Okay. Okay, so now we're going back. These sudden conversions of both brothers with an interval of only 3 days between them to a belief in the certainty of salvation by faith rather than by good works are probably described in one of Charles Wesley's famous hymns. And now we're going to go read the hymn. The hymn goes as follows. Long my imprisoned spirit lay, fast bound by sin and nature's night. Thine eye diffused a quickening ray. I woke, the dungeon flamed with light. My chains fell off, my heart was free. I rose, went forth, and followed thee. That was pretty. The reader may find some difficulty in realizing the immense contemporary importance of the religious problem, which Peter Bollier had helped the Wesley brothers to solve. To put faith before works implied a total reorientation of their religious position, as radical as the change from political conservatism to communism would be today. So this is a little bit tough to understand, for me at least. So I'm getting here that Peter Bollier helped the two evangelist brothers, the Wesley brothers, solve a problem. And the problem was to put faith before action. So the faith had to be first. Okay, so I'm gonna use Gemini in order to get more understanding of what is being said. So now we got this here. Copy. Gemini is, I'm not over how amazing it is to rephrase. So what we are rephrasing is the part that says, the reader may find difficulty in realizing the immense, and this is what it says. Oh shit, give me 1 second. Hurry. 115. So this is what Gemini is rephrasing it to. It says, it might be hard for people today to understand how important figuring out religion was for Peter Bollier and the Wesley brothers. They had to completely change how they thought about religion. It was like someone going from being very conservative to being a communist. A huge shift in their beliefs. Let me read it again because I don't have it clear even like that. I think I need to give Gemini more context. So it says, the reader may find some difficulty in realizing the immense contemporary importance of the religious problem which Peter Bollier had helped the Wesley brothers to solve. Okay? To put faith before works implied a total reorientation of the religious position. Okay? As radical as the change from political conservatism to communism would be today. Okay, I get it. So even though I still need a little bit more context to completely understand, I'm getting it, what it's saying. I understand. So it's just saying, it's just wording out how insane the religious problem they had is to change. That it would be from going from conservatism to communism. So that was an analogy. Okay, I get it. Whew. Okay, so now, once habituated to the new pattern of thought, John Wesley set about implanting it in others. Okay. With the help of his brother Charles, whose hymns were addressed to the religious emotion rather than the intelligence, he hit upon an extremely effective technique of conversion. A technique which is used not only in many other successful religions, but in modern political warfare. First of all, Wesley would create high emotional tension in his potential converts. He found it easy to convince large audiences of that period that a failure to achieve salvation would necessarily condemn them to hell life forever and ever. The immediate acceptance of an escape from such a ghastly fate was then very strongly urged on the ground that anybody who left the meeting unchanged and met with sudden fatal accident before he had accepted his salvation would pass straight into the fiery furnace. This is intense. This sense of urgency increased the prevailing anxiety, which, as suggestibility increased, could infect the whole group. Excuse me. Fear of everlasting hell, which was as real to Wesley's own mind as the houses and fields in which he preached, affected the nervous system of his hearers very much as fear of death. By drowning did Pavlov's dogs in the Leningrad flood. How do you pronounce that? Leningrad. Monsignor Ronald Knox quotes this autobiographical account from John Nelson, later one of Wesley's most able lieutenants, describing his own conversion. And this is the description. As soon as he, referring to Wesley, got upon his stand, he stroked back his hair and turned his face towards me, where I stood, and I thought, fixed his eyes upon me. His countenance struck such an awful dread upon me before I heard him speak that it made my heart beat like the pendulum of a clock. And when he did speak, I thought his whole discourse was aimed at me. Wesley learned in time that to capture an audience, he had first to gauge its intellectual and emotional capacity. He reports that on tour of Ireland in 1765. He reports that on a tour of Ireland in 1765. Accentuation is so difficult to get right sometimes. Like, you have to understand the sentence first, and then you have to read it to understand where you're supposed to accentuate the pronunciation. All right, so this is a report from Wesley's tour of Ireland in 1765. I rode to Waterford and preached in a little court on our great high priest that is passed into the heavens for us. But I soon found I was God above most of my hearers. I should have spoken of death or judgment. On Tuesday evening, I suited my discourse to my audience, and deep attention sat on almost every face. He fills his journal with day-to-day notes on the results of his preaching, for example. While I was speaking, one before me dropped down as dead, and presently a second and a third. 5 others sunk down in half an hour, most of whom were in violent agonies. The pains as of hell came about them. The snares of death overtook them. In their trouble we called upon the Lord, and he gave us an answer of peace. One indeed continued an hour in strong pain, and 1 or 2 more for 3 days. But the rest were greatly comforted in that hour, and went away rejoicing and praising God. Wesley also reports, about 10 in the morning, J.C., as she was sitting at work, was suddenly seized with grievous terrors of mind, attended with strong trembling. Thus she continued all the afternoon. But at the society in the evening, God turned her heaviness into joy. 5 or 6 others were also cut to the heart this day, and soon after found him whose hands made whole, as did one likewise, who had been mourning many months without any to comfort her. This took place at Bristol, but in Newgate prison, where many who heard him preach were soon due to die by public hanging. His message was not unnaturally even more effective. Immediately, one and another sunk to the earth. They dropped on every side as thunderstruck. One of them cried aloud, "We besought." What is besought? I have no idea what that word means. Let me see. That's a new word for me. Also, I am not really understanding many things that are being said in this page. So I'm going to rephrase the whole page to Gemini. Let's see. Besought. Besought is the past tense and past participle of the verb beseech. What the fuck is that? Beseech means to ask for or request earnestly and urgently. It implies a strong desire and often a sense of desperation or humility. The starving villagers besought the king for mercy. Okay, that works. Essentially, besought describes an act of pleading or imploring with great fervor. Okay, besought. We besought God in her behalf. Okay, so we looked with urgency or something along those lines. With great fervor. We besought God in her behalf, and he turned her heaviness into joy. A second being in the same agony, we called upon God for her also, and he spoke peace into her soul. One was so wounded by the sword of the Spirit that you would have imagined she could not live a moment. But immediately his abundant kindness was shown, and she loudly sang of his righteousness. With such preaching methods, it is not enough to disrupt previous patterns of behavior by emotional assaults on the brain. One must also provide an escape from the induced mental illness, from the induced mental stress. Hellfire is presented only as the result of rejoicing, Hellfire is presented only as the result of rejecting the offer of eternal salvation won by faith. I'm sorry, it's coffee and it's feeling like hot. There we go. Okay. Emotionally disrupted by this threat and then rescued from everlasting torment by a total change of heart. The convert is now in a state to be helped by dwelling upon the complementary gospel of love. The punishment for backsliding from a state of grace must always be kept in mind. But once conversion has taken place, love rather than fear can be used to consolidate the gain. On December 20th, 1751, Wesley wrote, I think the right method for preaching is this. This is going to be really important. Listen. At first, beginning to preach at any place, after a general declaration of the love of God to sinners and his willingness that they should be saved, to preach the law in the strongest, the closest, the most searching manner possible. After more and more persons are convinced of sin, we may mix more and more of the gospel in order to beget faith, to rise into spiritual life. Those whom the law hath slain. I would not advise to preach the law without the gospel any more than the gospel without the law. Undoubtedly, both should be preached in their turns. Yeah, both at once or both in one. All the conditional promises are instances of this. They are law and gospel mixed together. So, before this, we're going to get to a really, really important part. So, I am going to put everything on Gemini so we can get a rephrasing. Because even though I understand what this is saying, I want to understand it better. So, I'm gonna rephrase page 82 and 83. I'm actually going to do page 80, 81. So this is going to be a summary of the last 3 pages, all right? First, John Nelson's conversion. John Nelson describes how Wesley's powerful presence and preaching deeply impacted him. He felt intensely focused on by Wesley and experienced a profound sense of awe and fear. Okay, I did get that. The next one. Wesley understood the importance of connecting with his audience. In Ireland, he realized his message was too complex for some and adjusted his preachings to suit them. Okay. Next, Wesley kept detailed records of his preaching, including instances where people experienced intense emotional reactions, such as fear and distress. During his sermons, he believed these experiences were signs of God's work in their lives. Wow. Wesley's preaching style. Wesley's preaching often involved emphasizing the consequences of sin and the threat of eternal damnation to create a sense of urgency and fear in his listeners. However, he always offered a way out of this distress, accepting Jesus Christ and experiencing salvation. This approach aimed to emotionally disrupt people's lives and then offer them a new path through faith and a newfound relationship with God. Okay, Wesley's preaching method. Wesley believed in a balanced approach to preaching, combining the law, which is the understanding of sin and its consequences, with the gospel, which is the message of God's love and salvation. Wesley emphasized that these two aspects should be presented together as they are interconnected. Key points. Wesley's preaching style was highly emotional and aimed to deeply impact his listeners. Wesley believed that experiencing fear and distress could be a necessary step towards spiritual transformation. And his goal was to guide people away from sin and towards a life of faith and love. Okay, so what's next is the analysis of the Gospels and political brainwashing. So listen up. Political brainwashing similarly points to a new path to salvation after fear, anger, and other strong emotions have been excited as a means of disrupting the old bourgeois thought patterns. I know that's French, I think, but I need to know how to say it. Bourgeois. So the word bourgeois has few different meanings depending on the context. It can mean middle class. It can refer to the members of the middle class, typically those who are financially comfortable and have a certain level of social status. The definition is often used in a neutral way. Conventional and materialistic. It can have a more negative connotation, suggesting someone who is overly concerned with wealth, social standing, and traditional values. This usage often implies a lack of creativity and open-mindedness. Bourgeois. And the third one is capitalist. In Marxist theory, the bourgeoisie refers to the class of people who own the means of production and exploit the working class. This definition is often used in a political or economical context or economic context. Also, you can use it to say like ostentatious. Also, like the middle class thought patterns. I forgot how to pronounce it. Bourgeois. Bourgeois. That's cool. That's interesting. Bourgeois. Bourgeois. Cool. The old bourgeois. My French is awful. Anyways, the old bourgeois thought pattern. If the communist gospel is accepted, love may also be substituted for fear. But severe penalties of relapse await deviationist backsliders. Deviationist backslider is someone who goes back on their promise or whatever, who deviates. That almost sounds offensive. You're such a deviationist backslider. Fuck. That sounds fucking awful. Alright, so as Pavlov's experimental findings in dogs and experiences in the treatment of war neurosis would lead to expect, the effect of getting too emotionally involved, either positively or negatively, with Wesley's preaching was to increase markedly the likelihood of being converted. It often happened quite unexpectedly for the person concerned, that when he had been roused to the greatest pitch of indignation and anger by the proceedings, he suddenly broke down and accepted every belief demanded of him. For it has been shown in previous chapters that, listen, anger as well as fear can induce disturbances of brain function, which make a person highly suggestible and reverse his conditioned behavior patterns or even wipe the cortical slate clean. Dude, that's fucking insane. That's fucking crazy. Fuck. The first that was deeply touched was L.W., whose mother had been not a little displeased a day or two before when she was told how her daughter had exposed herself before all the congregation. Happy Sam. The mother herself was the next who dropped down and lost her senses in a moment, but went home with her daughter, full of joy, as did most of those that had been in pain. Wow. And on Friday, June 15th of 1739, he had also reported, some sunk down, and there remained no strength in them. Others exceedingly trembled and quaked. Some were torn with a kind of convulsive notion in every part of their bodies, and that so violently that often 4 or 5 persons could not hold one of them. I have seen many hysterical and many epileptic fits, but none of them were like these in many respects. I immediately prayed that God would not suffer those who were weak to be offended. But one woman was offended greatly, being sure they might help it if they would. No one should persuade her to the contrary, and was got 3 or 4 yards when she also dropped down, in as violent in agony as the rest. So I guess preachers have like a journal of how people react. That's an insight that I never even thought about. Like ministers probably record how the people are reacting to their preachings. That's wild, isn't it? I've never even thought about a father fucking jotting down if people went wild or how they reacted, or if they feel fear or something. It sounds like the people in these times, these evangelists, had a more mechanistic, a more almost like a sermon performance system. Like they actually had to prepare. This is so fucking interesting. Again, on July 30th, 1739, it says the following. One of these had been remarkably zealous against those who had cried out and made a noise, being sure that any of them might help it if they would. And the same opinion she was in still, till the moment she was struck through as with a sword and fell trembling to the ground. She then cried out loud, although not articulately, her words being swallowed up. In this pain she continued 12 or 14 hours, and then her soul was set at liberty. Those are a lot of fucking hours, holy shit. These phenomena were commonest when Wesley first began preaching after his own conversion. And when he addressed congregations unused to his methods, but he was recording them more than 30 years later, still convinced that to be effective, sanctification should be sudden and dramatic. He had originally rejected this theory when made by Peter Bollier, but on the rereading, his New Testament found that the effective conversions reported in it had, in fact, been sudden ones. Okay, I heard the word testament a lot. What the fuck does it even mean? I don't know what the word testament means. I have an idea, but I'm not sure. So let's see. So testament, a statement of belief. This is the most common usage. It refers to formal declaration of faith or a strong expression of conviction. Okay, a statement of belief. A legal document. In this context, a testament is a will, which is a legal document that outlines how a person's property and assets should be distributed after their death. Okay, part of the Bible. Bible is divided into two main parts: the Old Testament and the New Testament. These terms refer to covenants between God and humanity. Wesley took the trouble to check his results scientifically. So this is what he said. In London alone, I found 652 members of our society who were exceedingly clear in their experience, and those whose testimony I could see no reason to doubt. And every one of these, without a single exception, has declared that his deliverance from sin was instantaneous, that the change was wrought in a moment. Had half of these, or 1/3, or 1 in 20 declared, it was gradually wrought in them. I should have believed this with regard to them, and thought that some were gradually sanctified, and some instantaneously. But as I have not found in so long a space of time a single person speaking thus, I cannot but believe that sanctification is commonly, if not always, an instantaneous work. Wow. This did not mean, of course, that a period of intense anxiety, depression, self-questioning, and indecision, often enhanced by physical debilitation due to a variety of causes, had not preceded the sanctification. Such softening up processes can all contribute to the disturbances of brain function, which occur when stresses become too great and a protective mechanism starts to come into play. Wesley's appeal was most successfully made to the poor and uneducated, but we find him reporting in 1742. I could not but observe that here the very best people, so-called, were as deeply convinced as open sinners. Several of these were now constrained to roar aloud for the disquietness of their hearts, and these generally not young, as in most other places, but neither middle-aged or well-stricken in years. I'm gonna rephrase that. Again, like I told you, I'm Mexican, and English is my second language. I'm ESL, fool. I'm ESL ninjas. So I am using Gemini again to simplify this. I understand what it means, but it's not like solidly understood. So this is rephrasing complex text. I noticed that even the most respected and influential people in this place held the same strong beliefs as those openly expressing radical views. Some of these influential individuals were now compelled to publicly express their inner turmoil and distress. Interestingly, these individuals were not typically young, as seen elsewhere, but rather middle-aged or elderly. Okay, so I'm gonna keep reading more. That's pretty much saying that even more influential people is people who, the best people, were as deeply convicted as like open sinners, like drunks and whores. I shouldn't be calling myself a whore. Okay. In 1758, a powerful revival started at Everton. Cambridgeshire farm workers are by no means an easily excited group, but the Reverend John Burridge had also stumbled on the basic mechanics of sudden conversion process. Though accused by his religious detractors at the nearby Cambridge University of exhorting his audience to fall. Won't you fall? Why don't you fall? Better fall here than fall into hell. I did not mean to sound like that. Why don't you fall? He had no hesitation in inducing the final state of collapse in his converts, for the number of groaners, siders, tumblers, and convulsionists also caused dismay at the university. In Simeon, and church order, Charles Smith with a Y, reports him as writing. And now let me make one reflection. I preached of sanctification very earnestly for 6 years in a former parish, and never brought one soul to Christ. I did the same at this parish for 2 years without any success at all. But as soon as ever I preached Jesus Christ and faith in his blood, then believers were added to the church continually. Then people flocked from all parts to hear the glorious sound of the gospel, some coming 6 miles, others 8, and others 10. And that constantly. Berich told them very plainly that they were children of wrath and under the curse of God, though they knew it not, laboring to beat down self-righteousness, laboring to show them that they were all in a lost and perishing state, and that nothing could recover them out of this state and make them children of God but faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Wow. By this method, Southey writes, this man produced a more violent influenza of fanaticism than had ever followed upon Whitfield's or Wesley's preachings. Some persons tend to minimize the importance of psychological factors, emotional doubts, physical debilitation, and the like in religious conversions, and to emphasize them when excusing the victims of similarly induced political conversion. But successful brainwashing also demands the arousing of strong emotions, and these need not have any particular relevance to the new faith, provided that they are sufficiently disruptive. For example, Arthur Koestler's arrow in the blue describes his conversion to militant communism in these words. Though I had been steadily moving towards the communism position for more than a year, the final decision to become an actual member of the party was again a sudden one. This time, the event that clinched the issue was of a more profane nature. More precisely, it was a whole series of grotesque events crowded into one December evening in 1931. Koestler goes on to explain how one Saturday afternoon he went to fetch his car from a garage where it had been under repair for nearly 3 weeks. Ugh, that sounds fucking awful. Delighted to get it back, he drove straight from the garage to a friend's flat where a poker party was in progress. Koestler loved poker and was not too expert at it, but seldom lost heavily. That afternoon, however, he lost the equivalent of several months' salary, far more than he could afford. Dejected, I drove to an after-dinner party of the radical Bohemia, where I promptly got drunk, as under the circumstances was only to be expected. The party lasted till 2 or 3 in the morning, and I paid no attention to the fact that it had turned very cold and that I had no antifreeze in my radiator. When I left, the engine block of the newly repaired car had burst and a thick icicle was sticking out of one of the cylinder heads. A sight to make any motorist weep, even if the car was not his own. More trouble was still to come. On seeing my dismay, a girl who had been at the party, and who had always got on my nerves, offered me the hospitality of her nearby flat. This again leading to the consequences which were to be expected. He pondered some punani. I woke up in the morning with a super hangover mixed with self-reproach, anxiety, and guilt next to a person whom I disliked, financially broke, and with a burst-up car. That sounds fucking awful. Koestler comments, in my experiences, the language of destiny is often couched in vulgar slang. The series of grotesque misadventures on that Saturday night looked as if they had been arranged by a crude gesture, but the face of a clown bending close against your own can be very frightening. By the time I got back to the flat, my decision was made. Though I hardly felt it to be mine, it had made itself. Pacing up and down in my bedroom, I had the sudden impression that I was looking down from a height at the track along which I had been running. I saw myself with great clarity as a sham and a phony, paying lip service to the revolution which was to lift the earth from its axis, and at the time which leading the existence of a bourgeois, careerist, climbing the worm-eaten ladder of success, playing poker and landing in unsought beds. So as of this point, I am hating having to use Gemini because the editing is going to take a lot longer. But you know, I'm doing this for you guys. So subscribe, okay? Because even though not many of you will go this far in the video, just know that this information is gonna help you a lot in not allowing people to brainwash you. Believe it or not, there's a lot of people around you that brainwash you. The reason that I'm reading these books is because of gang stalking. Gang stalking is literal brainwashing. So I am gonna, actually, I don't need to rephrase this because it is literally being said right here, right before I started reading that. Okay. So the summary, we already read it. We literally just got summarized by the book before reading it. Okay. Okay, so the rephrasing, I don't have to do it because it's there. Let's see now. The pattern of Koestler's life underwent a total change, and he remained a loyal communist until 6 years later. Until 6 years later, when he experienced an equally intense reconversion. In The God That Failed. The God That Failed is a book, I think. Oh, so The God That Failed is a collection of 6 essays from 1949. Arthur Koestler is mentioned here. The common theme of the essays is the author's disillusionment with and abandonment of communism. The phenomena were seen to follow a series of emotional shocks when captured and imprisoned during the Spanish Civil War. The experiences responsible for this change were fear, pity, and a third one, more difficult to describe. Fear, not of death, but of torture and humiliation, and the more unpleasant forms of dying. And finally, a condition of mind usually referred to in terms borrowed from the vocabulary of mysticism, which would present itself at unexpected moments and induce a state of inner peace, which I have known neither before nor since. In The Invisible Writing, he also says, The Invisible Writing, I think it's an essay. On the day when Sir Peter Chalmers and I were arrested, there had been 3 occasions when I believed my execution was imminent. On all 3 occasions, I had benefited from the well-known phenomenon of a split consciousness, a dreamlike, dazed self-estrangement, which separated the conscious self from the acting self, the former becoming a detached observer, the latter an automaton, while the air hums in one's ears as in the hollow of a seashell. Much worse was another episode on the same day, being photographed for the Rogues Gallery against a wall in the street, hands tied in the midst of a hostile crowd. This last incident had revived catastrophic panic feelings experienced during a surgical operation in his childhood, Koestler reports. This, together with the other events of the same day and of the next 3 days with their mass executions, had apparently caused a loosening up and displacement of psychic strata. Okay, what's psychic strata? So, the concept of psychic strata isn't a standard term in mainstream psychology or neuroscience, says Mr. Gemini. It is more likely to be found in esoteric or spiritual contexts. Some spiritual or metaphysical systems might use psychic strata to describe layers of consciousness or energy within the human psyche. These layers could represent different levels of awareness, vibration, or access to higher states of being. Psychoanalytic schools. Certain schools of psychoanalysis, particularly those with a more Jungian or depth psychological orientation, might utilize a concept similar to strata to describe the layered nature of the unconscious mind. In general, the idea of strata implies a layered structure, and when applied to the psyche, it suggests that the mind is not a single monolithic entity, but rather a complex system with different levels of depth. Psychic strata close to rock bottom, a softening of resistances and rearrangement of structures, which lay them temporarily open to that new type of experience that I am leading up to. These clinical observations become still more interesting when he gives, in non-religious terms, the same sort of mystical experience that fills the literature of religious conversion. The fact is that mystical experiences, like sudden conversions, do not always arise from purely religious influences and stresses. They can sometimes be induced by chemical means, such as, for instance, mescaline, ether, and laughing gas. That's fucking crazy. Koestler's detailed accounts of his 2 conversions and the quasi-mystical experiences that accompany the second of these show how varied are the emotional and physiological stresses that can help towards conversion. His stresses include a severe alcoholic hangover, a broken down car, heavy financial loss, a disagreeable sexual entanglement, civil war capture, threats of sudden death by shooting, and the revival of a childhood panic. In each case, the new troubles were heaped on to the old until their combined weight perhaps proved more than could be tolerated by his nervous system, and a change in brain patterns seemed to have occurred. Koestler's The Invisible Writing should be read for a full description of his non-religious mystical or dreamlike type of experience in prison. Then I was floating on my back in a river of peace. Under bridges of silence. It came from nowhere and flowed nowhere. Then there was no river and no I. I had ceased to exist. He also says, the coming back to the lower order of reality I found to be gradual, like waking up from anesthesia. Whether the experience had lasted for a few minutes or an hour, I never knew. In the beginning, it occurred two or even three times a week. Then the intervals became longer. It could never be voluntarily induced. After my liberation, it occurred at even longer intervals, perhaps once or twice in a year. But by that time, the groundwork for a change of personality was completed. He wrote that. He himself experienced a change of personality and he wrote about it. To me, that's fucking nuts. Experiences of this sort can be induced by a wide range of stresses on the brain. What is more, feelings of divine possession and subsequent conversion to a religious faith can be helped on by the use of many types of physiological stimuli. It should be more widely known that electrical recordings of the human brain show that it is particularly sensitive to rhythmic stimulation by percussion and bright light, among other things. And certain rates of rhythm can build up recordable abnormalities of brain function and explosive states of tension sufficient even to produce convulsive fits in predisposed subjects. It is said, like I have read on other places, that bright lights and a lot of weird sounds confuse people. And guess what happens in gang stalking? Headlights, a lot of bangs, a lot of noises, and a lot of lights in gang stalking. In gang stalking, I continuously had people literally shine flashlights on my fucking eyes at the auto parts store, like a lot of times. So that actually works. Some people can be persuaded to dance in time with such rhythms until they collapse in exhaustion. Furthermore, it is easier to disorganize the normal function of the brain by attacking it simultaneously with several strong rhythms played in different tempos. This leads on to protective inhibition, either rapidly in the weak inhibitory temperament or after a prolonged period of excitement in the strong excitatory one. So if this is your first video of this series, you are not going to understand what protective inhibition is. You're not going to understand what weak inhibitory temperament or strong excitatory one. So protective inhibition is where your mind just kind of collapses in order for you to not overheat, where there's a lot of things going on in your brain and your brain is it kind of just gives up trying to understand them. Then weak inhibitory temperament is when someone has a temperament that gets into protective inhibition really easily. And strong excitatory one is when someone gets aroused really strongly. Like when someone gets upset, like if someone is being confused, they don't go into protective inhibition. They go into a strong excitatory. So they're polar opposites. We cover this in chapter 1 of this series. So check chapter 1, and there we cover that. These were terms, by the way, coined by Parlov. Now, rhythmic drumming is found in the ceremonies of many primitive religions all over the world. The accompanying excitement and dancing is also maintained until the same point of physical and emotional collapse has been reached. Alcohol and other drugs are often used to heighten the excitement of religious dancers, and this too hastens the breakdown. After which, feelings of being free from sin and evil dispositions and of starting life anew may occur. Belief in divine possessions is very common at such times, And so is the mystical trance, essentially similar to that experienced by so many Christian and other saints in cramped cells or under martyrdom, and vouchsafed to Koestler when threatened with shooting, and Koestler when threatened with shooting by the Franco forces. So practically here it's saying that in ceremonies, in religious ceremonies, there's liquor, there is drumming, there's a lot of dancing, people are trying to get tired, there's drugs, and then there is this point where they get into a trance state in which the religious conversion happens. This same thing, this divine possession, is also common by a lot of Christians and saints that have been in cramped cells or that have been martyrs. Like Koestler, when he was threatened with shooting by the Franco forces. The voodoo cult in Haiti shows with what ease suggestibility can be increased by subjecting the brain to severe physiological stresses. Voodoo has numerous deities, or loa, some of them African tribal gods, brought to the West Indies by slaves, some of them saints whom Catholic priests later taught the slaves to invoke. The loa are believed to descend and take possession of a person, usually while he or she is dancing to the drums. The possessed person then behaves as the particular deity should behave, the different habits of loa being a matter of tradition, as with soldiers who continue to fight after being temporarily stunned by an explosion, or football players who get kicked on the head in the early stages of an exciting match, then possessed have no recollection when they come to themselves again an hour or so later of what has seemed to others an intelligent and effective performance. The case of men and women who have been worked up into a state of suggestibility by voodoo drumming shows the power of such methods. Though apparently unconscious, they carry out all the detailed behavior expected of the particular deity by which they believe themselves possessed. A voodoo priest increases excitement and suggestibility by altering the loudness and rhythms of the drums, just as in a religious snake hanging cult, which I observed myself in the United States. The preacher used the tempo and volume of singing and hand clapping to intensify the religious enthusiasm, and emotional disruption was finally induced by thrusting live poisonous snakes into their hands. After a terminal collapse into stupor, both groups of participants may awake with a sense of spiritual rebirth. In 1949, Maya Deren went to Haiti on a Guggenheim Fellowship to study and film Haitian dancing. In The Divine Horseman, she has published a detailed account of the physiological and psychological effects of the drumming on her own brain, ending in her apparent possession by Urzuli, the goddess of love. She tells how the drums gradually induced uncontrollable bodily movement until, as a climax, she felt possession coming on her. She wrote, "My skull is a drum. Each great beat drives that leg like the point of a stake into the ground. The singing is at my very ear, inside my head. This sound will drown me. Why don't they stop? Why don't they stop? I cannot wrench the leg free. I am caught in this cylinder, this well of sound. There is nothing anywhere except this. There is no way out. The white darkness moves up the veins of my leg like a swift tide, rising. It's a great force which I cannot sustain or contain, which surely will burst my skin. It is too much, too bright, too white for me. This is its darkness. Mercy, I scream within me. I hear it echoed by the voices, shrill and unearthly. Urzuli, the bright darkness floods up through my body, reaches my head, engulfs me. I am sucked down and exploded upward at once. That is all." She also tries to convey some of the strange feelings and impressions that came upon her while dancing in a trance around the peristyle of the Voodooan meeting house, behaving as the goddess Urzuli is supposed to behave on such occasion. If the earth is a sphere, then the abyss below the earth is also its heavens, and the difference between them is no more than time, the time of the earth's turning, if the earth is a vast horizontal surface. Such Feelings expressed in ordinary language are incomprehensible and even nonsensical to readers who have never experienced the paradoxical, ultra-paradoxical phases of brain activity induced by intolerable stress. White darkness, for instance, makes no more sense to them than would the intense mystical joy excited by flagellation. Flagellation is like the flogging. Maya Duran enjoyed feelings of spiritual rebirth as she recovered from her trance. How clear the world looks in this first tall light. How purely form it is, without, for the moment, the shadow of meaning. As the souls of the dead did, so have I, too, come back, I have returned. These experiences which changed her plans for the future, as well as her outlook on voodoo, also show what may happen to those who try to fight rather than avoid these mechanistic processes by too strong an exercise of willpower. The emotion expended in the effort sometimes only hastens their breakdown. Maya Duran describes how she was caught in this way. Just before her possession, she had felt herself becoming vulnerable to the drumming and turned her back on the dancers, but then rejoined them from a proud sense of professional duty. For I know that today the drums, the singing, the movements, these may catch me also. Turn away would be a cowardice. I could resist, but I must not escape. And I can resist best. I think to myself, if I put aside the fears and nervousness, if instead of suspecting my vulnerability, I set myself embracing competition with all this which would compel me to its authority. But in the end, she found herself forced to submit. With great blow, the drum unites us once more upon the point of the left leg. Why did she mention left leg? You know, I don't know if there's any other type of meaning of that shit, but my gang stalking sensations were always on my left leg, on my left foot actually. That's fucking weird. What the fuck? If anyone knows anything about left leg, and if there is any type of saying that talks about the left leg that I'm not understanding, please let me know and write it in the comments. Also, you need to subscribe right now. Like right now, okay? Alright, so the white darkness starts to shoot up. I wrench my foot free, but the effect catapults me across what seems a vast distance, and I come to rest upon a firmness of arms and bodies, which would hold me up. With every muscle I pull loose, and again plunge across a vast space, and once more am no sooner poised in balance than my leg roots. So it goes, the leg fixed, then wrenched loose. One long fall across space, the rooting of the leg again. For how long, how many times, I cannot know. This is very important. Listen, the best way to avoid possession or indoctrination, conversion, in all similar conditions is to avoid getting emotionally involved in the proceedings. Too fierce in anger or contempt for the voodoo priest or for the religious snake handler may be as dangerous as to quake with fear when one or the other inaugurates a meeting. Horace Walpole's emotionally detached attitude to John Wesley's preaching, quoted by Knox, was the one most likely to preserve him from sanctification. So an emotionally detached attitude is most likely to preserve you, to keeping you from any type of conversion. Wesley was as evidently an actor as Garrick. He spoke his sermon, but so fast and with so little accent that I am sure he has often uttered it, for it was like a lesson. There were parts and eloquence on it, but towards the end he exalted his voice and acted very ugly enthusiasm. ¿Mother? No, ¿por qué le vamos a sacar las pilas?
Yo había pegado con la tele y ahorita que fui estaba tirado y estaba abierto.
¿Yo por qué lo voy a abrir? But no fui yo. But would Walpole have been able to maintain this attitude if Wesley had visited Strawberry Hill with a force of army drummers, some of whom might be his sanctified converts, to overwhelm him with the ruffles and double flams? Parlow showed that when new behavior patterns were implanted in his dogs, they would become sensitized to the particular stimuli associated with this change. It can be the same human beings. Maya Duran experienced 7 or 8 attacks of possession, from which it sometimes took her as much as 4 hours to regain consciousness. She found it more and more easy to respond to the drums and the dancing, and emphasizes in her account the sense of being overwhelmed by a transcendent force. Anyone who has succumbed to the voodoo drums and dances or to snake handling, anyone who has succumbed to the voodoo drums and dances or to the snake handling, but is ignorant of the physiological processes involved, may believe that the feelings of sanctification or possession are due solely to the god or gods invoked. This is what they were told to expect. And the softening up process may have made them suggestible to the most varied types of dogma. In West Africa, the original home of voodoo, Ms. Jean Rouge, the French social anthropologist who is also an expert on the culture of the Songhay tribe, has recently made a remarkable documentary film showing Songhay migrants returning to the Ivory Coast from a visit to the Gold Coast. They are performing a dance learned from a Gold Coast cult group who believe in spirit possession and who help to arouse the necessary enthusiasm and suggestibility by drumming. One interesting feature of the film is that the devotees come to believe that they are possessed not by a loa of ancient tradition, but by the personalities of important living beings. They even believe that the Governor General of the Gold Coast and senior officers of the West African Rifles make a spiritual entry into them and mime their gestures realistically. Also, oddly enough, the spirit influences include a railway engine conceived as a demon, since many Songhays become casual workers on the Gold Coast Railway. In the film, the dancers are seen traveling onward the next day, sober and obviously benefited by their abreactive experience. All such methods of implanting or fortifying beliefs may have somewhat similar results. When Maya Deren is discoursing on the spiritual values of voodoo, she might well be compared to a patient trying to discuss in a reasonable and constrained manner a now successfully completed psychoanalysis. Where's my water? No. Oh. If you ever go to the dollar store, these things are fucking bomb. They're so fucking good. Oh my god, I cannot have enough of them. This is the watermelon strawberry. It tastes like a watermelon Jolly Rancher. So good. Oh, so amazing. And this is the italicized text. I will say that it incorporates values which I am in personal agreement, displays an organizational, psychic, and practical skill which I admire, and accomplishes results of which I approve. I would further say that I believe that the principles which Gahir and other Loa represent are real and true. It was this kind of agreement with and admiration for the principles and practice of voodoo, which was and is my conscious attitude towards it. Okay, so I'm gonna use Gemini to understand this. So Gemini got a shitty ass rephrasing that actually didn't make any sense. It's talking about a financial strain. So I am rereading this, and this whole part is just saying that these cults, voodooism, and all these rituals do the same thing. They all make the people get emotionally involved. It brings up emotions, psychological disturbances. If you don't know what is psychological disturbance, I recommend for you to check out my video that talks about psychological disturbances. This part is also saying that anyone who has succumbed, who has befallen onto the feelings of sanctification or possession, and who has believed that these are due to the god or gods invoked, that this possession is what they were told what to expect before it even happened, was actually preparing them. It was making them suggestible to these very types of dogma. They are not told that there are actually physiological processes involved in the ritual of sanctification. These people, I'm sure even those who perpetuate these rituals are unaware of the actual physiological processes that happen during these invocations. They get prepared. It's like gang stalking. In gang stalking, when you get the big show where you get to the point where you realize that gang stalking is bigger than you possibly thought, and then you go online and then you find all this information about direct energy weapons while you are in a fucking panic. Guess what? You are indoctrinating yourself. That is exactly what I did when I got gang stalked. When I got gang stalked, you're like, oh, holy shit, you know, I drove for 2 hours. I was fucking freaked the fuck out. I was freaked the fuck out, you know. I drove for 2 hours. The entire drive was fucking crazy. Like, I feel like I was getting followed. It was some big old crazy process. So then I got to my friend's house. He wasn't there. So I got in there and I got on my phone and I began looking for gang stalking. And then direct energy weapons are following you, blah, 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 blah. And then I got all this information on there. And guess what? It's the same shit. That's part of the indoctrination. That's how gang stalking happens. If I had gotten that big show, and then I would have come across one of my own videos that says, you know what, gang stalking is just a bunch of people being assholes. Then I would have been like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then I would have been on with my day. I would have approached gang stalking completely differently. You know, this is the information that needs to be out there for targets. They're supposed to find information that says, if you are in a panic, go read motivational things. Go read self-help books. I'm gonna tell you a secret. So during gang stalking, I read this stuff. And every time that I was getting attacked by gang stalkers and I was getting all these sensations, I began saying affirmations. I knew that I read this book. I'm not sure if anyone that gang stalked me. If you're like someone who participated in gang stalking, just know that the last years of gang stalking, I was actually hypnotizing myself with the gang stalking techniques in order to be the best person I can possibly be. That's gonna take a little bit of time, but I'm getting there. So all the work, all the bangs and all of that, I was actually using it to my benefit by saying affirmations and imagining myself being amazing, understanding everything. Like, that's why I was able to get out of gang stalking, because I kept repeating to myself, gang stalking is nothing. I can handle this. Nothing that is done to me that causes any psychological disturbance. I did this for months, for many months before I decided to be done with gang stalking. I was like, okay, I understand everything. I understand the processes, the physiological processes. So now it is time for me to use this to benefit as much as possible. And guess what? After I learned all of this, I have actually been using all the techniques that I learned in gang stalking to have incredible discipline, to have the best body I have ever wanted. I stopped my abuse of illicit substances. I stopped smoking cigarettes. I stopped being a victim. I was literally using everything that gang stalking was supposed to make worse for me, and I turned it around. I learned how to self-hypnotize. I really did. And it's something that it's really tough to explain. It's really hard to explain. But you're gonna see that in like a couple of months, like I'm gonna look not completely different, but like I'm gonna be where I want to be. So this is literally telling you, this actually told me the way out of gang stalking is that when you're getting gang stalked, you use the physiological sensations as a sign of shit, something is happening to my brain. And when that happens, you just fucking think whatever you think during those intense moments of gang stalking is when you can program your mind. This is gonna sound weird and a little bit out of place, but when you're jacking off, if you say affirmations before you come, it does something. Like any type of intense ecstatic emotion, and you like when you're about to come, you just boom, sabotage those images with images of you know, being incredibly successful or working really hard. What your brain is gonna be doing is that it's gonna tie in the pleasure with the image of you working really hard, of getting the body you want. So your brain is gonna make those ties. So you can actually use masturbation as a way to hypnotize yourself into making yourself a better being. We're gonna cover that in another topic, or in another video. But the reason that I'm saving those videos for later is because I have to become that which I'm telling you that you can become by using the methods that I'm telling you about. Because like a personal trainer, you cannot be a personal trainer or at least a personal trainer who has a lot of clients and is successful at what they do if you don't walk the talk. So in order for me to make myself more plausible, I have to have the banging body, you know, the discipline, everything that I'm telling you that you can do, I have to be able to do it. And that is the reason that I haven't covered everything that I want to talk to you guys about. But that's gonna come in about 4 or 5 months. 4 or 5 months. 5 months at the most. Maybe sooner. Anyways, coming back to this. So going back to the gang stalking, and then we're gonna go back to the book. So in gang stalking, when you go online and you find the booklets like the Target's survival guide or this, that is the softening up for you to have an expectation. That is what builds the gang stalking illusion. If you get gang stalked and then you come across my videos and you see me, right, telling you all of this shit is made by people who are being assholes towards you. Direct energy weapons don't exist, but the stress causes your body to create sensations. So it is stress. Don't believe anything that you see online. Once you see that, if you get gang stalked and you find my videos, you find the truth about how they do the sensitizing, then you might still be a target. But you are not going to believe the bullshit that it's fed to you. Like, oh, we have some crazy technology. You're not going to believe any of that. The truth is that I believe that shit. I did, but I never said anything because I knew that something was off. So I just didn't fucking say anything. I said it now. Now that I understand it, now that I know it's not fucking real. So the fact that people that are about to go into these rituals are softened up or are prepared to have a certain expectation, that is what makes these experiences real, because they are told what to expect. Therefore, it's like it's giving them a lens to interpret what they feel as a very specific thing. So they are expecting the feelings of feeling overwhelmed by a transcendent force, instead of saying, oh, I feel dizzy. I feel dizzy. I feel like, instead of saying that, they say they're being overwhelmed by a transcendent force. That's it, dude. Okay, now we're going back to the reading. A comparison between the methods already described and those used by some primitive tribes all over the world to initiate and condition adolescent boys into religious societies should also be mentioned, because the underlying physiological principles do appear to have certain similarities. In such cases, however, the new attitudes to be implanted will be more consistent with their previous experience and general tradition of culture than in some of the other instances given in this chapter. Gustav Bolender, in Devilman's Jungle, describes how West African boys are taken away from their parents to an encampment in the woods, where all their clothes are removed and they are subjected to conditions of severe physical hardship. The procedure is suitably fear-provoking. First, they are given a medicine, which they are told will certainly kill them sooner or later if they ever reveal the secrets of the society or the details of the ceremonies they are about to undergo. Next comes the ritual bath. At dusk, they are lined up and told, a life outside Poro is scarcely worth living. He who is not a member wanders about in the darkness. It is only through Poro that you realize what it is that you have to live for. He who wishes to become a member of Poro must say goodbye to life as he has lived it, hitherto be born afresh. In an increasingly terrified state, they now see the secret society's most frightening approaching them, or society's most frightening mask approaching them. With starting eyes and bushy eyebrows, huge jaws like a crocodile in which his teeth shine red with blood. He is bearded like an old man, and he has the horns and feathers on his head, and a shapeless figure, a cloak of fibers that has not resembled to anything human. For the boys, it is a real demon, but they are not allowed to utter a sound. They are laid side to side, side by side, on the ground. Then each in turn is seized by the demon's assistants, and almost unconscious with fright, lifted up and put between his jaws. They are then rescued and immediately given extremely painful ritual tattooing. The ceremony is accompanied by loud noises on wooden instruments. Gradually, the half-conscious novices recover their senses. They feel convinced that the demon has made an end to them, but Poro has raised them to new life. After a few days after the tattoo scars have healed, The boys began a prolonged training in the camp intended to make them useful members of the tribe and the society in which they are no adepts. Childhood habits are dispersed. They learned, among other things, the correct attitude which they must in future adopt to their superiors, and increase their hardihood and fortitude by taking part in strenuous tests of endurance. Sex training is given them, with education in primitive handicrafts, carpentry, fishing, and the like, all of whom amounts to a new conditioning process as members of their tribe and secret society. Okay, I'm gonna pause here. Who is giving the guys the sex training? My mind is so dirty, so it's like, okay, I need more detail on this. Who is educating these boys and how are they being sexually educated? That's crazy to me. Like, who is educating the boys? For real. Okay, moving on. Here again, an overwhelming emotional stimulus carries the subject to the point of emotional collapse and increased suggestibility. And here again, the fear-provoking stimulus is offset by a means of salvation, the benign portal to which the boy clings in his reconditioning process. Gustav Bollinger also reports, certain exercises are used to try and efface. EFFACE means to erase, or to make oneself inconspicuous, to make oneself appear insignificant or inconspicuous, to erase, efface. What a pretty word. I wonder if you can tell that, like, if someone's dick is small, to cause to banish. Okay, so it wouldn't be like that. Self-effacing would mean that someone is shy. Cause to vanish. Okay, so cause to vanish. Certain exercises are used to try and efface remnants of personal individuality or unorthodox ideas. These begin with monotonous movements of the body and conclude with mystical rites. The prime factor here is the dance. A dance, anything but static, rather suggestive in its uniformity. Round the tree, the novices dance slowly with bowed heads. Now, the booming wooden drums have taken up the accompaniment. Without a pause, slow and uniform dance continues hour after hour. They're dancing for hours, holy shit. In the end, the novices are only semi-conscious, threading mechanically in the same everlasting rhythm. They are no longer on earth. They have become merged in the unity of the mighty forest demon and feel spiritually uplifted. When you're clubbing, the drums, the music, the DJ, it's like the only thing that exists. And the music is so amazing, and it's all about making money, spending money, and being really hot. That's what a circuit party is about. It's about being really hot, being someone. You dance until you're exhausted. You listen to the music, you take a pill. That's what's happening. That's why we get so addicted to clubbing, huh? It's like an application. That's kind of amazing. Holy shit. Huh? Okay. That is food for thought. I'm gonna have to write that down. Give me one second. Okay. Sir James Fraser in The Golden Bough gives further examples of such initiation rites. He shows that some tribes in northern New Guinea and many Australian tribes also make circumcision as an essential feature of the tribal initiation. And the initiation is conceived by them as a process of being swallowed and disgorged by a mythical monster whose voice is heard in the humming sound of the bull roarer. The bull roarer is also used by the ancient Greeks and called the rhombos. It's a wooden instrument which, when whirled around the head on a cord, makes a sound like a roaring bull or a rising gale. Various terrifying ways of being swallowed are then described, but the initiate is inevitably rescued. In one tribe, he has now to undergo the more painful and dangerous operation of circumcision. It follows immediately, and the cut made by the knife or the operator is explained to be a bite, or scratch, which the monster inflicted on the novice in spewing him out of his capacious jaw. Wow. While the operation is proceeding, the prodigious noise, what is prodigious? Enormous or natural, remarkably or impressively great in extent. Prodigious.
Prodigious.
Prodigious. Oh, I spelled it right. Pronounce it prodigious. You have such prodigious pussy. Imagine saying that to your hookup. You have such prodigious tits. Anyways. Oh, you need to subscribe, okay? Can you please grant me your prodigious subscription? I would really appreciate it. Thanks. A prodigious noise is made by the swinging of bull roars to represent the roar of the dreadful being who is in the act of swallowing the young man. The same reconditioning process then takes place. After they have been circumcised, the lads must remain for some months in seclusion, shunning all contact with women and even the sight of them. They live in the long hut, which represents the monster's belly. When at last the lads, now ranking as initiated men, are brought back with great pomp and ceremony to the village. They are received with sobs of joy by the women, as if the grave had given up its dead. One interesting detail about the use of such methods in Fraser's statement that several tribes in New Guinea used the same word for the rombos or bull roarer as for the monster who was supposed to swallow the novices. Okay. And whose fearful roar is represented by its noise. A close association of ideas is established between the son of the rombos in the powerful ghost or essential spirit who swallows and disgorges the novice at his initiation. The rombos or bull roarer becomes in fact his material representative on earth. This use of the rombos as a constant reminder of the power and presence of the god or essential spirit recalls Parlov's discovery that most of the dogs which were nearly drowned in their cages during the Leningrad flood, see chapter 1, and had their conditioned behavior patterns broken up by it, became sensitized to the sight of that trickle of water under the laboratory door. He could get at them afterwards by merely emptying a bucket of water outside. Gang stalking, when you get harassed by the signs, by the fast movements, same shit. If you're getting gang stalked, just use this information to tell you that you are always reconditioning your mind. So like if I'm here studying this stuff, I am reconditioning my mind to be thinking about this and about psychological aspects of the mind instead of being focused about gang stalking. So I'm making everything gang stalking related into psychology related. I am not thinking of gang stalking as something that was done to me. I am thinking of gang stalking as something that you can use to make yourself more powerful. So if you're getting gang stalked, when you're getting gang stalked and when you are getting upset, say affirmations. Say I'm fucking amazing. I'm fucking awesome. I'm incredible at blah, blah, blah. I don't use any illicit substances. I use that. That's how I stopped any illicit substance. I thought to myself, if these fuckers make sure that I stay an addict, I'm gonna use everything that they do to stop me from being one. And boom, problem solved. If you're getting gang stalked, just know that gang stalking is what keeps you stuck in drugs. Gang stalking is a bunch of people actually looking out for you to entice you to use drugs. It's fucking awful. So if you know who I am and and you're wondering what the fuck happened to this guy that he got lost for 7 years and I heard he became this and all that, just know that I have a shit ton of haters which are bound to hate me more, but whatever, it is what it is. In judo, you just use the enemy's forces against them or to your advantage. And that's exactly what I have to do. So I am making the best I can from the shit that happened to me during the past 7 years. Anyways, now we're going back to the reading. In highly civilized Christian countries, today, a similar attempt is sometimes made to invest God's representative on earth with as much religiously toned emotion as possible. But in order to safeguard infants and young children against damnation, the rite of baptism, originally reserved for adults, and a powerful ceremony indeed is now carried out a few weeks or months after birth. Confirmation has, in general, taken the place of baptism as an initiatory rite. And among Protestants, still provides a strong ceremonial stimulus for boys and girls at the age of puberty. But in Latin countries, the first communion also tends to be taken too early for full emotional effect. It seems certain that such stimuli should be made emotionally disturbing to produce the desired effects. Even severe enough sometimes to induce mystical experiences. Once a mystical experience is associated with a cross or some other religious emblem, it can be revived and confirmed by the emblem's subsequent appearance. Intellectual indoctrination without emotional excitement is remarkably ineffective. This is important. Intellectual indoctrination without emotional excitement is remarkably ineffective. As the empty pews of most English churches prove, the social pressure which once sent even the agnostic or lukewarm to Sunday matins having long been relaxed, and recently we found ourselves welcoming a high-powered American fundamentalist who had come to win back for the churches the congregations that they had lost. What the force of religion could once be, even under civilized paganisms using effective methods, is shown by Fraser's account in The Golden Bow of the Syrian Astarte worship. The great festival of this goddess fell in early spring. While the flutes played, the drums beat, and the eunuch priests slashed themselves with knives. That sounds already crazy. The religious excitement gradually spread like a wave among the crowd of onlookers, and many a one did that which he little thought to do when he came as a holiday spectator for a festival. For man after man, his veins throbbing with the music, his eyes fascinated by the sight of the streaming blood, flung his garments from him, leaped forth with a shout, and seizing one of the swords with which stood ready for the purpose, castrated himself on the spot. When the tumult of emotion had subsided and the man had come to himself again, the irrevocable sacrifice must often have been followed by passionate sorrow and lifelong regret. This revulsion of natural feeling after the frenzies of fanatical religion is powerfully depicted by Catullus in a celebrated poem. Oh my god. Self-castration. That's fucking intense, dude. It does seem that most powerful religious movements are attended by physiological phenomena which cause intellectual disgust and dismay in non-participants. Thus, Fox's blameless friends, whose faith was based on non-violence, were given the sneering nickname of Quakers because they shook and trembled before the Lord. The Quakers. That adds a completely new meaning to the word Quaker. Wow. Men, women, and little children at their meetings are strangely wrought upon in their bodies and brought to fall, foam at the mouth and roar and swell in their bellies. Fox himself reports in his journal, the Captain Drury, though he sometimes carried fairly, was an enemy to me and to truth, and opposed it. And when professors came to me while I was under his custody, he would scoff at trembling and call us Quakers, as the Independents and Presbyterians had nicknamed us before. But afterwards, he once came to me and told me that as he was laying on his bed to rest in the daytime, he felt a trembling, that his joints knocked together and his body shook so that he could not get off the bed. He was so shaken that he had not strength left and cried to the Lord, and he felt his power was upon him, and he tumbled off his bed and cried to the Lord and said he never would speak against the Quakers some more, and such as trembled at the word of God. Here I have to tell you a story. The first time that I experienced shaking was when I was staying at the Hotel River Leaf in Mission Valley in San Diego. I was literally just laying in bed and my bed felt trembling. It literally began to tremble. I looked under the bed and it was nothing. So my first thought, guess what it was? Direct energy weapons. Why? Because I had read about fucking direct energy weapons before. But then it went from that and then I went into spirits. I was on a corner room and there was no other room adjunct to mine. So that was weird. And that's why I thought there was like someone with like a fucking direct energy weapon. So at this point, I thought the direct energy weapons were real. But yeah, it's like the one time where I was at the fucking shelter and fucking the floor began shaking up and down. And I saw that I was like, oh my god, gang stalkers are pushing the floor from underneath. And you know, the truth is that all that stress is gonna cause you to feel sensations. Here we're getting proof that this is something that happens to people. It's like instead of the Lord, it's gang stalker. So, like I told you in another video, gang stalking experiences is an indoctrination. That's exactly what it is. It is an indoctrination that everyone is in on. The Quakers later settled down to become rich and respectable, abandoning the means by which they had built up their early spiritual strength. It is the fate of new religious sects to lose the dynamism of their enthusiastic founders. Later, leaders may improve the organization, but the original conversion techniques are often tactically repudiated. The wild militancy of General Booth's early Salvation Army is gone. The frantic scenes of the Welsh revival are forgotten in new and respectable chapels, where the quill, a Welsh preaching device for exciting the congregation to religious frenzy by breaking into a wild chant, is now rarely heard. The surprise that Dr. Billy Graham's success caused in Great Britain, where all he had to compete with were religious addresses aimed at the congregation's intelligence rather than its emotions, show how widespread it is the general ignorance of matters discussed in this book. I want to repeat that last sentence because it's really important. The surprise that Dr. Billy Graham's success caused in Great Britain, where all he had to compete with were religious addresses aimed at the congregation's intelligence rather than its emotions, show how widespread the general ignorance of matters discussed in this book. So this book literally is telling you, watch your emotions when you are meeting new people. Because when people make you feel a lot of emotions, you can be indoctrinated. You can be manipulated into doing things. I feel that is exactly why people who have narcissistic personality disorders have methods that are so effective, because that is the love bombing. They make you feel a lot of emotions and they keep in touch with you so that you start being indoctrinated into them. That's the thing. That's all it is. It's just a lot of emotional pushing. You're literally getting banned. That's fucking insane, isn't it? That's fucking crazy. So you want to make sure to not be emotionally involved with religions unless you really want to be part of it. Even in Christianity, the gift of tongues, sometimes only an incoherent babble, is still applauded by certain primitive sects as supposedly reproducing the experience of the apostles at Pentecost. And great importance is placed in other religions too on the appearance of trance phenomena. This is shown by the attribution of divine wisdom to the Delphic oracle in classical Greece. It is shown in Tibet, where the national policy can still be decided by an oracle of the same sort. That is fucking crazy. Herer, in 7 Years in Tibet, describes how his Tibetan friend Wandula took him to an official consultation with the oracle at the Nechun monastery at Lhasa. A 19-year-old monk was the mouthpiece of the oracle at that time, and Herer remarked, "It was always a curious experience to meet the state oracle in ordinary life." State oracle, dude. I could never quite get accustomed to sitting at the same table with him and hearing him noisily gulping his noodle soup. When we met in the street, I used to take off my hat and he bowed and smiled in return. His face was that of a nice-looking young man and bore no resemblance to the bloated, red-fleckled, grinning visage of the ecstatic medium. Herer gives details of what happened when the oracle fell into a trance and wondered whether drugs or any other means were used to induce it. The monk has to be able to dislodge his spirit from his body to enable the god of the temple to take possession of it and to speak through his mouth. Hollow, eerie music greeted us at the gate of the temple. Inside, the spectacle was ghastly. From every wall looked down hideous, grimacing faces, and the air was filled with stifling fumes of incense. The young monk had just been led from his private quarters to the gloomy temple. Here is Herer's description of the actual possession. The trembling became more violent. The medium heavily laden head wavered from side to side. The medium's heavily laden head wavered from side to side, and his eyes started from their sockets. His face was swollen and covered with patches of hectic red. Now he started beating on his gleaming breastplate with a great thumb ring, making a clatter which drowned the dull rolling of the drums. He then gyrated on one foot, erect under the weight of the giant headdress, which just now 2 men could hardly carry. The medium became calmer. Servants held him fast, and a cabinet minister stepped before him and threw a scarf over his head. Then he began to ask questions carefully prepared by the cabinet about the appointment of a governor, the discovery of a new incarnation, matters involving war and peace. The oracle was asked to decide on all these things. This is insane. Herer goes on to say that he attended many consultations of the oracle, but had never been able to arrive even at an approximate explanation of the riddle. Some persons can produce a state of trance and disassociation in themselves or in others, with a decreasing need for strong and repeated emotional stress, until it may become so much a conditioned pattern of brain activity that occurs with only minor stresses and difficulties. I experienced that in gang stalking. A little bit of stress gets you in this fucking trance. That's exactly what happened. It still happens. Like, I still get lost in the thoughts of gang stalking when I'm just like doing something. Like, my mind just gets lost in that state. It does it a lot less and less now. Like, when I'm working, I'm here. If you see me just like kind of like less moving, like when I'm just like zoned out, well, actually, never mind. You don't see that because those parts are cut off. But yeah, like there's times where I still like zone out, and it's when I get lost in like memories of gang stalking. It's weird, but it's a lot less. For example, in the primitive religious context, at the renewed beat of a drum or the screaming roar of the rumbles, states of possession or trance have also been used by numerous religions to try to help the spectator, as well as the possessed person, to accept the relevant doctrine as true. If the trance is accompanied by a state of mental disassociation, the person experiencing it can be profoundly influenced in his subsequent thinking and behavior, even if the spectators remain unmoved and devoid of any emotional excitement. It may still help to persuade some of them of the truth, of the belief professed, especially if they have been led to think that a trance means that the person concerned is now possessed by or in communication with a certain god. When the modern spiritualistic medium in her suburban house uses messages from dead relatives or from the ghost of an Indian fakir or from a childlike spirit called Forget-Me-Not to help to create faith in spiritualism, has the same mechanisms Forget-Me-Not to help create faith in spiritualism. The same mechanisms may be seen in operation as when the state oracle of Tibet gyrates and clatters in the Nechung monastery, or as when drugged pythons of Delphi, her face distorted by Apollo's divine possession, raged on her tripod, pouring out a stream of confused prophecy, which the priests in charge, if suitably paid, turned into hexameters for the visitant. The proof of the pudding lies in the eating. What is that? The proof of the pudding lies in the eating. Gemini? I'm assuming it's like a saying, right? So I'm gonna ask Gemini. The saying, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, means that you can only judge the quality of something after you have tried it, used it, or experienced it. So essentially, the saying emphasizes the importance of practical experience and real-world results over theoretical claims or promises. For example, you can say, you can talk all you want about how great your new marketing strategy is, but the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. Oh, so if it actually increases sales. Okay, cool. Wesley changed the religious and social life of England for the better with the help of such methods in a modified and socially accepted form. In other hands, in other countries, they have been used for sinister purposes. But one can be thankful that there have always been scientifically curious people in all ages prepared to examine and report on the actual results obtained before condemning the use of such methods out of hand. Thomas Butts has this to report about Wesley's preaching as early as 1743. As to persons crying out or being in fits. I shall not pretend to account exactly for what, exactly for that, but only make this observation. It is well known that most of them who have been so exercised were before of no religion at all, but they have since received a sense of pardon, have peace and joy in believing, and are now more holy and happy than ever they were before. And if this is to be, no matter what remarks are made on their friends. So that is the end of chapter 5. In summary, William Sargent is telling us that spiritual conversion uses drugs, sounds, lights, pain, rituals, emotions in order to brainwash someone into believing something. And is finishing up with and is giving us plenty of examples of tribes around the world, of religions around the world, and how there has also been people who have applied this in such a way that made life better. For example, in England, 1736. Was it 1736? Yeah, 1736. So 1736 to 1739. And then also that during those times, Koestler actually made England better by actually applying these methods of psychological manipulation, of brainwashing in order to make people better. Because when Collier was in England and he adopted these new methods of preaching, people were happier. Like he helped people, and they were holier than ever. And by holier, I mean they weren't whores, they weren't gambling. Like they were holier people. They were people with no vices. They were people who were actually following a good path in life, which led to more people being happy, and they felt content. So that he actually gave a good use to these methods. And that is pretty much what we are covering here. Also, how tribes, in order to brainwash a boy into being a man, they had the boy go through a traumatic experience that would fill the kid with fear, and then cast the boy aside in isolation with other boys who are going through the same thing in order to turn them into men, to put them into training, such as like the military. In the military, the soldiers are broken down and then they are built back up. They are made to be useful in a particular manner. These techniques of indoctrination are still applied today. And being broken down, being exhausted, having a lot of stress has a big impact on how susceptible you are in regards to adopting new beliefs or new habits. This chapter only covered the religious aspect of brainwashing. I also wanted to add that William Sargent adds the fact that people who have not been indoctrinated will consider those who've been indoctrinated as weird, as Quakers, as nonsensical. In addition to that, these types of conversions make people have bouts of faith that are impossible and maniacal, such as the auto-castration that Sargent mentions, that was documented about, where we even read the testimony of people that have castrated themselves in the name of some faith. Very Game of Thrones style. So anyways, this book literally touched up on every single thing of brainwashing and things that make no sense to someone who has never experienced such an indoctrination in any way, shape, or form, will believe of the indoctrinated one as crazy or not making sense. But the truth is that traumatizing a person and then imposing a terror or a belief will cause the person to have crazy beliefs due to the trauma. So you are literally more sensitive to adopting new beliefs, regardless of how insane or how ridiculous it might be, if you are caught under intense emotional distress. All right. So if you are under intense emotional distress, don't go to a religion. Don't stay in touch with people that you know are not good for you. In fact, you can use that to your benefit. When you are under intense emotional duress, you want to read more about things that are good for you. You want to listen to and watch motivational speeches. And you want to purposely impose motivating ideas, concepts, and images. All right? I just wanted to put this in the video because I totally forgot to mention this. Oh, and it's the same thing in gang stalking, is that in gang stalking, people, assholes, let's call them assholes, impose this terror on you that is so strange and puts you in a weird state of mind, and then they keep harassing you. So literally targets are getting brainwashed. And all of this applies. So why was I able to understand gang stalking? Because I read this book. I read this book and I understood it. So anyways, if you're here for the brainwashing, watch the next chapter, which it's gonna possibly be out in a couple of weeks because it literally took me 1 week for this video. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and if you have any comments, any ideas, or any suggestions, or any questions, please put it in the comments, and please subscribe. Okay, bye. And on chapter number 6, we're gonna cover the military and political aspects of brainwashing. Thank you so much for watching. This is Efren Rodriguez, The Woke Project. If you have any questions, any insights, or any experience that you would like to share with me, please write it in the comments. Remember that the more aware we are of these types of tactics, the better. And that is it for this video. Thank you so much. Have a good day and subscribe!